I was thinking I would do something on empathy, compassion, and presence, because there's a lot of. I've done a few meditations on this subject. I think there's one on my webpage, and I did one with 10% Happier, and they've been called empathy versus compassion, which is maybe not the best way to put it. And so a lot of people are confused about it because it's basically what I say is basically that it's really important to have compassion, and sometimes empathy can lead to these negative effects. And it kind of makes it sound like some people are like, oh, does that mean something about empathy is not good? Or so I wanted just to kind of take this opportunity to clarify a little bit about the empathy compassion thing, and then guide a practice around it. So this interest in particular of mine came out of, it's sort of part of my interest in neuroscience and the science stuff. There was a really great paper that came out about 10 years ago by a social neuroscientist named Tanya Singer, who's, I think, based in Berlin. And it was all about this question. And actually, I'll get Andrew to put a link in the show notes so you can read the paper. It was a really interesting paper. What they did was basically they wired up all these brains of people, and they had these different control groups. And one of the groups sat there and basically watched images of people in distress. And what they found was that when this happened, the same parts of the person watching and the people in distress, the same parts of their brain lit up that the people who were in distress lit up. In other words, they were basically really deeply empathizing and experiencing to a certain degree some of the same stresses. And this is kind of part of empathy. We feel someone's pain. We kind of know this. And then they had another group where they basically got this, or rather, it was the same group later, a different training. I can't remember exactly the science stuff. Sorry, I'm screwing this up. There's scientists out there, but I'm getting it roughly right. They took another group and they basically gave them in the first part, in addition to watching other people and experiencing challenges, they also did a whole training in empathy. So of learning how to feel other people's pain. So they'd done a whole training in this, and as a result, they had a lot of these responses. But with the compassion people, they did a similar thing where they basically did a training and then watched these videos. Except their training was in compassion, meaning it wasn't in just creating and empathizing with what someone was going on, like feeling someone's pain. It was actually actively wishing someone well. And the reason this is important is around resilience and around like what they found in the caregiver world. What they found in the caregiver world is when people are continually exposed to other people's challenges day in and day out, the empathy, of course, is super important to get them kind of on the same, to get them on the same page. But after a while, they start to burn out. They start to experience a lot of negative affect themselves. And so the idea was that, is there a way to help these caregivers? I mean, we're all in that caregiver role in our lives in different position. Is there a more effective stance to take in the moment other than just purely feeling what someone's feeling? And the idea is that a more active form of compassion could be that strategy. And I should say here, it's not just when you're repeatedly exposed to challenges around you. It's one of the ways we respond is by getting overwhelmed, is by really taking on a lot of that distress ourselves. If any of us have ever felt stressed being around stressed people, you'll know what that's like. And what happens then? Often it's like aversion, get me away from here. So there's that response. But the other response often is to shut it down. That in order to cope with those situations, we completely suppress our empathy just so we can get through the day, and we kind of get numb. And that's not a really adaptive strategy either, or maybe it may be adaptive, but probably not a really useful one in the long term for really being able to help folks. So the idea is that there's this other way. There's this way of like, you use the empathy in the moment to help you recognize, or it's to help you kind of synchronize with the person. So it's like, okay, great, you're having this empathic response. And then as soon as you sort of notice that, then you kind of override that response with a more active, warm compassion, which is like sort of wishing someone well, that kind of thing. And that is actually much more sustainable. That's what they found in the experiment, that it's much more sustainable. And it's sort of, I think, what a lot of people just figure out how to do intuitively, people who are surviving in, caregiver positions, doctors and nurses and all that. So I thought with this meditation, we would keep it in the do nothing spirit, meaning it's going to be pretty easygoing and lazy-ish. It'll be a lot about just cultivating presence. So when I teach strong compassion, I kind of teach two parts. I teach a first part of just being present. What does that actually mean? Being in presence means being present. It means being available to the situation, not trying to block it, not trying to suppress it or get away from it, just finding this opening to it, but doing it in a way that you feels like you're connecting to this sort of strong ground underneath you, which is sort of a particular flavor of equanimity. So that's kind of how I set it up. And then from that place, go into a place where you're actively sending some caring to someone. So in our practice, we'll do mostly just the presence part. And then for the loving kindness portion at the very end, the last 5 minutes or so, we'll do a more active compassion where we're sending someone we know is having a hard time, wishing them well.